Hello and welcome to the Elder Small channel. I am Elder Small, and today in this session I'd like to review chapter 2 of my book, You Deserve More, which you can pick up at eldersmall.com. It'd be an excellent addition to your library. The title of chapter 2 is Consciousness, Substance of Eternity. And in the second chapter, it starts out asking the question, when a child is born, is it a new soul being born? Likewise, is death of a human being the death of the soul? These are questions that are asked when a child is born and when someone dies. And when we think about these questions, the question that comes to mind is, have we been prepared psychologically, emotionally, philosophically, and spiritually to answer these questions for ourselves? For many of us, the Bible has played a major role in how we think and how we calm our emotions when sickness and death visits our families, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Myself and many other generations before me were taught that God is Alpha and Omega. That is, God is the beginning and the end. We were taught that God made the first human beings and assigned them their responsibilities. In Genesis, the first chapter, verse 26, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." No explanation was ever offered for God said, let us make man, which indicates that a team or multiple deities took part in the creation of human beings. As I dug deeper for answers, it was said to be a reference to the Trinity, a Trinity which was unknown to the Old Testament writers because the Trinity was introduced as biblical doctrine in 325 CE at the Council of Nicaea, that is, literally centuries after the writing of the Pentateuch. Nevertheless, the most influential words in the text are the words, "Then God said," so that many of us have lived our lives believing that God made us because the men who wrote the Bible said so. Now, let me point out that in the verse I just read, God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." This is the first of two creation stories in the book of Genesis. In the second creation story, the writer tells us that God did more than form man from the earth, that is, create an earth man. The writer of the second narrative introduced the spirit, the soul, into the creation of man. And so, Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 says, "And the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." In the first creation narrative, we are made from earth, formed in the image and likeness of God. In the second creation narrative, we are made from earth, but God breathed into us the breath of life. God breathed into us his spirit. We became living souls. These are examples in the Old Testament where it is evident that the writers or editors got a bit sloppy. In another example of sloppy editing, the first creation story says, "Let us make man in our image." The gods are speaking to one another. The reference to gods is repeated in Genesis 3:22, where it says, "Then God said, Behold, man has become like one of us to know good and evil." It is common knowledge that the Israelites were monotheistic. Moses gave the Israelites 10 commandments, the first being, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." So the reference to us, that is, plural gods, indicates confusion among the writers or the editors of the Old Testament. It is an amazing accomplishment, meaning that the Israelites told us how the earth, sky, oceans, all forms of life on earth, how this was all done, and they told it on just a few pages. In addition, they were able to narrate the circumstances whereby death became part of the human condition. Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17 says, "And the Lord commanded man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge and of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." This is the first reference to death recorded in the Bible. And why they found it necessary to say that Adam and Eve would die upon eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is somewhat perplexing. Together, both Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and did not die as stated in the text. They had children, they raised the children, they lived long lives. And in chapter 5 of Genesis, verse 5, it says, "So the days that Adam lived are 930 years, and then he died." Given the pattern of contradictions and misconceptions, it seems obvious that the Israelites were retelling stories that were derived from spiritual philosophies, cultural ideologies, and social institutions they did not fully understand. Take a moment and Google documentary hypothesis. You will find that scholars concur that the first 5 books of the Bible are composed of at least 4 separate documents. Each document made its way through schools of editors, and over the course of hundreds of years, the various documents were compiled to form one single document. That is the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And so, the first 5 books of the Bible are the result of a long process. It provides context for questioning the concept of inspiration. Most schools of theology teach the doctrine of inspiration, which is that the Bible was inspired by God. They also teach the doctrine of inerrancy, which is that the Bible is without error. The Bible is without error, the perfect Word of God. And so, while millions of people believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God, perfect and without error, others see the Bible as a book of folklore, fables, fiction, legends, myths, fabrications, misrepresentations, and stolen information. There's a scholar, his name is Gerald Massey. He writes the book Ancient Egypt, Light of the World. Gerald Massey is a historian, he's a poet, he's a scholar. He also writes the book of the beginnings. And he writes the book Natural Genesis. These are books packed with information. They would do well in your library. Gerald Massey says, the misreading of mythology on which theology was founded has created confusion everywhere. It has obscured the past, perplexed the present, beclouded the future, concerted all scientific truth into religious falsehood, and made chaos in the moral domain look like the one and only permanent institution in creation. And so, going back to Genesis for a moment, God appears to be speaking directly to Adam, warning him not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for in doing so, he would die. As the story continues to unfold, Eve has a conversation with a serpent about the same tree. Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 through 4 says, the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the tree in the garden, but of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, you will surely not die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. There is enough evidence in this story to suggest that God was wrong and the serpent was correct concerning eating the fruit and death. Both Adam and Eve touched the tree and ate the fruit, and they did not die, at least not until centuries later. More than 2,000 years ago, that is, during the first century of our era, Philo, a accomplished, recognized, and important Jewish historian, wrote that the Pentateuch is not a narrative of events that occurred in Hebrew history, in Israelite history, but like most sacred texts that was recorded in ancient civilizations, the Hebrew text recounts their history and beliefs using a mix of symbology, allegory, and mythology. For example, he says that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that in this story, it intimates that wisdom and moderation, by means of which things contrary in their nature to one another might be distinguished. In another example, Philo says, when the soul has received the impression of vice, it has become the tree of knowledge of good and evil. From Philo's perspective, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is allegorical. However, we have been taught that the story is literal history, and that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from the tree, and ate the fruit from the forbidden tree, they morphed into sinners and were sentenced to death. And this is simply not true. During the reign of the Romans in Kemet, that is Egypt, the Alexandrian Jews placed the world's oldest spiritual science, the world's oldest mythology, philosophy, and symbology on butcher's blocks and butchered them until they were beyond recognition. Once they pillaged through the sacred sciences and looted what they thought would help their quest to dominate the world, the priests were killed, the libraries destroyed, the scrolls and papyrus and books, records. They were put in piles and burned. And so, again, Gerald Massey informs us that the myths of Egypt, the myths of Kemet, will be found to have been copied and reproduced and declared to have been given directly from the hand and mouth of the Lord, whereas there was no revelation or divine origin in the matter. Let me read that again. Gerald Massey says the myths of Egypt will be found to have been copied and reproduced and declared to have been given directly from the hand and mouth of God, whereas there was no revelation or divine origin in the matter. And so I'd say today that knowing the origin of their sacred writings, non-African Jews, Christians, and Muslims did everything in their power to eliminate, colonize, and marginalize Africans, hoping to erase their connection to the origins of the sciences, the origin of spirituality, philosophy, astrology, mythology. They wanted to erase the African origin of the sciences from the origin of the sciences from the face of the earth. However, they could not erase the writings that were etched into temple walls, coffins, and pyramids on the pyramids. The problem with erasing the African presence was compounded by the fact that Africa was the home of people who migrated to China, India, the Americas, all over the world. And as time would have it, many of those people returned to Kemet to study under Kemite priests. They entered Africa. They entered ancient Africa, Kemet, the African nation of Kemet, as students and returned to their homelands as priests. Kemite priests and priestesses visited them from time to time, as they also traveled to all parts of the world teaching the Kemetic sciences. The impact of African culture relative to civilization can never be erased. It gave birth to schools of science, philosophy, psychology, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, cosmology, spirituality, meditation, prayer, and much, much more. And so, knowingly and unknowingly, various aspects of African arts, science, and spiritual practice are present among people and cultures throughout the world today. And so, this is going to be a 2-session review. This is the conclusion of the first session. I hope I said something that was enlightening. Meanwhile, as we close out this session, let me say dua, which in the ancient Kemetic tongue means thank you for your time here in this session. I say, a Yoruba word, which means it has the power to create oneness, unity. So I say dua, and may you be blessed with supreme good and intellectual greatness. Thank you, dua, I say, we are one. Have a great day.